April mornings in the Pacific Northwest always feel a little too quiet. I remember pulling up my blinds, letting the gray daylight spill into my bedroom, and just standing there for a second, half dressed for my noon class. The air was still, except for the distant sound of crows. That's when I noticed him. Down in the yard, a guy, maybe mid-30s, ball cap low, hands on his hips, just sort of pacing around like he owned the place. He moved with this weird, deliberate cadence, stopping every few steps to look out over the drop-off, then back at the house. At first, I tried to convince myself he was here for the renovations, maybe admiring the view, or just taking a break. But something about the way he moved, too comfortable, too slow, put me on edge. He drifted out of sight, toward the side of the house. My heart started to thud. I tiptoed upstairs, peeking out from behind a curtain, and saw him again, now in the front yard, right by the driveway, eyes scanning everything. He never looked up at my window. I grabbed my phone, dialed my dad, and tried to keep my voice steady. He sounded half awake when he picked up. But when I asked if we'd hired anyone to come by, he went quiet. He said he'd check with my mom and call me back. While waiting, I finally noticed the car, a white Honda, parked right up against the front steps. No license plates, just sitting there, engine off. My stomach twisted. Nobody parks like that unless they're planning to stay a while. I remembered the security system. I crept down the hall, pressed the buttons with shaking fingers, and listened for the faint beep. If he tried anything, the police would be called automatically. At least, that's what I hoped. My phone buzzed. It was my dad again, voice tight now. He said neither he nor my mom had scheduled anyone to come by. He told me to call the local police right away. I dialed the city police station, explaining everything to a woman who sounded bored. She said she wouldn't send anyone, just gave me a number for the emergency dispatch line. Her voice made it sound like I was wasting her time. I called the number she gave me, an automated message. Thank you for calling the non-emergency hotline. Nobody is available to take your call. If this is an emergency, please hang up and dial 911. I hung up, hands shaking, and made my way back upstairs. Every door, every window. I locked them all, double-checked the latches. The house felt suddenly too big, every noise sharp and hollow. 15 minutes had crawled by. The guy was still out there, circling the house. I dialed 911, breath catching. The operator asked for a description, too calmly, like she was reading from a script. She kept me on the line, asking about his clothes, his build, the car. I tried to keep my answers steady, but I could feel my voice quiver. She finally said she'd send officers, and I asked if I could stay on the line. She agreed. I crept back to the window. Now the guy was sitting in his car, head down, some kind of radio show or maybe a phone call blasting from the speakers. A loud, angry man's voice echoed out, harsh and jarring in the quiet. Then, out of nowhere, I heard that flat, empty tone, the one you get when someone hangs up. The operator was gone. I stared at my phone, confused, the silence pressing in. My phone rang again. The number was unfamiliar. I thought it was the operator calling back, so I answered. There was nothing but heavy, labored breathing on the other end. Slow, deliberate, almost like someone was trying to make sure I heard it. I hung up so fast I nearly dropped the phone. My hands were shaking now, panic finally breaking through. I dialed 911 again, voice cracking, and before I could explain, the new operator already knew my name and address. She told me officers were on their way. 20 minutes crawled by. I kept watching from behind the curtains, every muscle in my body tight. The guy was still in his car, radio blaring, not moving. Finally, just as the police car pulled into the driveway, the white Honda started to back out. They stopped him at the end of the drive, blue lights flickering against the trees. I watched from the window, breath held. A few minutes later, one of the officers came to the door. He handed me a wrinkled flyer and said, it was just a landscaper. He had an appointment. His tone was flat, almost dismissive. I felt this weird mix of relief and irritation. All that panic, all that waiting, for a landscaper I didn't even know we needed. But something about it didn't sit right. The car, the way he moved, the heavy breathing call, none of it added up. I called my mom, voice still shaky, and told her what the officer said. She sounded confused, then firm. We never hired a landscaper. We don't need one. I stared at the flyer in my hand, the print already smudging from my grip. The house felt smaller now, like the walls had shifted closer. Outside, the forest pressed in, and the sky was starting to darken. I never saw that car, or that man, again.
The first time I noticed someone watching was back in spring of 2017. I was standing in the kitchen, lights off, just staring out at the yard. That's when I saw a figure motionless, right outside my front room window. He didn't move, not even when I blinked. My yard's big and dark, trees everywhere, and the neighbors, they keep to themselves. It's the kind of place where you can disappear if you really want to. I thought about calling the police, but it's a small town. Folks don't like to get involved. I knew if I called, it'd be a whole thing, and maybe nothing would come of it. So, I bought cameras. Motion lights, too. I put them everywhere I could. After that, the man didn't come back. Or if he did, he stayed out of sight. A few years slipped by. I kept the lights and cameras, but I stopped checking them every night. I let myself believe it was over. Then, this April, I started noticing a truck. Not outside my house, but parked 2 blocks from my daughter's school. It was old, boxy, with a dented fender and faded paint. The kind of truck that blends in if you're not looking for it. At first I figured maybe he'd broken down, waiting for a tow or a friend to pick him up. But he was there every week. Same spot, always alone. I started to keep track, 4 weeks in a row, that truck sat there, engine running, windows up. Never saw anyone get in or out. On May 21st, I was visiting my cousin's place across town. I spotted that same truck circling the block. When I left, he was coming around again. I waited, let him pass, then pulled out behind him and memorized the license plate. Didn't write it down, just kept it in my head, repeating it until I got to my sister's house. My sister's place is just off Main Street, right across from the town park. You can see her house from the park's parking lot, even with all the construction going on. I spend most of my days there, helping out with her kids, trying to keep busy. But lately, I've been watching the street more than usual. The next morning, May 22nd, I dropped my daughter at school and headed to my sister's. I stepped out on her porch for a smoke, and there he was again. That truck, parked at the edge of the roped-off lot. The park was empty, construction tape flapping in the wind, but he sat there anyway. I tried to snap a picture, but my hands were shaking. The photo turned out blurry, almost useless. I told my sister about the truck, showed her the picture, though you could barely make out the license plate. We started warning each other, texting whenever we saw it. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, just a coincidence. But it kept happening. My niece, Priya, just started her first job at a burger joint in town. We only have 2 fast food places side by side. If you park at one, you're facing the other. Her schedule never changed. Same hours, every week. We tried to keep an eye out, but there's only so much you can do. On May 23rd, the truck was at the park again. My sister loaded her kids into the car and went to pick up Priya. The truck followed her to the burger place, but parked across the lot, facing them. He just sat there, watching. My sister tried not to look, just got Priya and drove home. He stayed behind. A few nights later, Priya told us the man came through the drive-thru. He kept saying he knew her, that he'd seen her before. She tried to ignore him, just got his order ready. But when she handed him his food, he said her name. Not just a guess, he said it like he'd been waiting to say it out loud. Priya said she didn't answer him, just stepped away from the window. But when she came back, he said her name again. She told us later, her voice shaking, that it felt like he'd been practicing it. We tried to reassure her, but I could see my sister was just as scared as I was. We had a few more run-ins after that. The truck would appear, linger, then disappear. Sometimes I'd spot it parked on a side street, engine off, windows fogged. Every time he had an excuse, just sitting at the park, just eating fast food. Nothing we could prove. Last night, my sister and I drove to our friend Lynn's house. We parked by her carport, and the 3 of us went for a walk on the bike path. 45 minutes, just talking, trying to shake off the tension. It felt good to be out, away from the windows, away from the truck. We were on our way back when I noticed tail lights glowing by Lynn's carport. Not moving, just idling. We picked up the pace, not saying anything, but I could feel my heart speeding up. Half a block away, the vehicle in the alley pulled off, slow and deliberate. We broke into a run, cutting up the side road to try and see who was leaving the alley. I caught a glimpse as the truck's headlights swept over us. Same dented fender, same faded paint. It was him. Again. I felt my stomach drop. We checked Lynn's house, every window and door. Everything was still locked. I tried to convince myself he'd just gotten lost, just needed to turn around, but I knew better. He'd been sitting there, waiting, in the alley behind her house. That was it. We flagged down a patrol car, told the officer everything. I showed him the blurry photos, gave him the plate number. He listened, nodding, but I could tell he'd heard stories like this before. He said they'd keep an eye out, maybe shake the tree a little. Told us to call if we saw the truck again. Now every time I walk outside, I catch myself scanning the street for that truck. I know the police can't watch everywhere. I know the lights and cameras only do so much. Some nights the yard is quiet, just the wind and the hum of the streetlights. But sometimes I think I see headlights flicker between the trees, waiting for me to let my guard down.
When I was 5, my parents moved us out of a cramped apartment in Queens to a house tucked deep into the Connecticut woods. The first morning, I remember waking to quiet so thick it felt like a blanket, the kind that muffles even your own heartbeat. My mom was only 27 then, and she fell in love with the place instantly. She'd stand on the porch, breathing in the pine and damp earth, saying it finally felt like home. But that peace didn't last. It started with my mom mentioning a man she kept seeing around town. At the supermarket, he'd be in the next aisle, smiling a little too long. At the park, he'd be on a bench, not reading or talking, just staring. My dad brushed it off at first. He said, in a small town, you run into the same faces. But my mom's voice would tighten when she talked about him. She said it wasn't just coincidence. I started to notice how she'd check over her shoulder when we left the house. She'd grip my hand tighter in the parking lot, glance at every car that passed. There was a tension in her that hadn't been there before. It got worse. She'd spot him more often, sometimes in places that felt too far apart to be chance. At the post office, the gas station, even parked on the shoulder near our driveway, engine idling, just waiting. One afternoon, she left to pick up my little sister from nursery school. She saw that same car through the trees, parked up the road. When she pulled out, it followed. She told me later she'd never been so angry. When she came out with my sister, the man was standing by his car, sunglasses on, staring. She yelled at him every curse she could remember from Brooklyn days, and he took off. That was enough for my dad. He came home early and called the police. I remember the officers in our living room, their radios crackling, talking in low voices with my parents.
We know who he is. He's been a problem before, but he's not dangerous. Just simple-minded. We'll talk to him and his folks.
That night, the man's parents called our house, their voices trembling with apology. They promised he'd leave my mom alone, that they'd keep him away. My dad accepted it, maybe too easily. For a year, maybe more, things were quiet. No more sightings. My dad would drive by their house sometimes, just to check. The woods pressed in, but nothing happened. We all tried to forget. Then one summer night, everything changed. I was in bed, not asleep, listening to the TV from the living room. My little sister wandered down the hall toward the den. Suddenly there was panic. My sister was gasping, clutching at her chest. My dad rushed one way, my mom another. The shower came on. Steam, they said, might help her breathe. I heard my mom shouting, her voice cracking, telling my dad to call for help. He said he'd called 911, that they were coming. The house felt like it was shrinking around us. I crept down the hallway, hoping to find my dad. The staircase to the front door was just ahead, the den off to the left. I could hear water running and my sister wheezing. At the bottom of the steps, the front door stood wide open. A man was there, staring up at me. I thought it was the police, until my mom's scream tore through the house. My mom's scream was raw animal. She grabbed me from behind, her nails digging in. My dad appeared, torn between my sister's gasps and the man in the doorway. The man looked at my dad, then bolted into the night. My dad started after him, but stopped. He knew where the man lived. He yelled at my mom to get us into the kitchen. 2 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed outside. The cops rushed in, confusion on their faces. They'd come for a medical call, not a break-in. EMTs followed, rushing to my sister. The inhaler hissed and her breathing eased, but my mom was frantic, telling the police that the man was still out there, that he'd been watching us. The officers swept the property, flashlights slicing through the trees. They found him running down the road, breathless and confused, as if he couldn't understand why anyone was upset.
He's been driving by your house for months. He told us he watched through the windows at night. He said he wanted to help, thought he could save the day.
He was arrested, charged with trespassing and stalking. My mom couldn't sleep after that. My dad put in for a transfer, and by fall, we were gone, back to the city, where the noise felt safer than the silence. Years later, an old neighbor told us the man ended up in a group home. He died of a heart attack alone. My mom can laugh about it now, but I don't think she ever truly relaxed again. Sometimes I think about that house, the way the wind sounded in the trees at night, how the quiet could feel so safe and so dangerous at the same time. I wonder what's out there, listening.